Hello and welcome back to At the Power Table podcast. We're so excited to have you here, and thank you for being patient with us. We do realize that we said that we're going to take a month break of summer holiday, but then took way more than that. The truth is that I've had a really difficult summer this year. I lost my dad, so it's been quite difficult navigating the emotions and living life with such big change. But we are processing and we are getting there slowly but surely. And we are back with more podcasts, which is even more exciting news. This week we are speaking to Lizzi Gold, the Business Development Manager at RheEnergise. And we are talking all about energy storage, the different technologies, what is the need for energy storage in the energy industry, and what role it plays, and what we need to do in the industry to continue to build and decarbonize our future. Lizzi and I met via Philippa Rogers, who also works at RheEnergise, and reached out to nominate Lizzi as a fantastic candidate, and I couldn't be more excited about it. I do fangirl throughout the session, and I think I still am fangirling now, but I've got it under control, thankfully. It's a brilliant podcast. Lizzie's incredible, and I'm so excited to share it with you. Hope you enjoy. Bye. Cool watch, by the way.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's a Swatch watch. It's waterproof, so I always never have to take it off.
Do you swim?
Yeah, I swim. I've done a couple of triathlons, and I just would never remember to take it off because I've broken watches like that before.
So thank you, Lizzi Gold from RheEnergise, for joining us at the Power Table podcast. We are so excited that you are taking a seat with us today. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Now I'm completely awkward because the nerves have gotten to me. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about what your journey has been like and what you do in the industry.
Sure. I currently work for a company called RheEnergise, which is in the energy storage sector. But originally I studied chemistry at university. So I have a master's in chemistry from Bristol. So I've always been kind of technical, science focused. And then I graduated. I went to Mexico for a year because I didn't want to think about anything academic. So I went to teach English. And then I came back and I worked in marketing for a few years for an international consultancy, helping agencies with international briefs, because I thought I wanted to do something creative. And then after a few years, I saw my friends and peers working in technical subjects, working in energy. And I thought, actually, that looks really cool. I want to do something more like that. So I was trawling LinkedIn looking for job ads, and I saw an ad from a company called RheEnergise, which I'd never heard of before. A tiny company, were just getting started. So it was the founders looking for someone to join as their first full-time hire. So I applied and have been with RheEnergise since 2020. I came in an operations role, helping grow the business, grow the team. And we're now 30 people across 2 locations. We have an office in London. We're about 10 people in the UK, and we have an office in Montreal in Canada. And there's about 20 engineers there. That's our R&D center where we do all of our engineering design.
That is so cool. Lots to unpack there. I think mostly firstly studying chemistry and then going into policy and then moving into energy. I think that's really cool. I'm very keen to focus on that pivot. What was that experience for you?
Yeah, I think I felt like I wasn't using my right brain as much. A lot of my job was organizing events. I organized an awards show for marketing agencies. So kind of great creative campaigns, which was really cool. Got to meet some really interesting people, see some really cool stuff. But yeah, I was kind of like, I think if I don't move now, I'm going to lose that sciencey technical side. So I pivoted, and at the beginning it was pretty weird. I was like, okay, now I have to kind of crunch numbers again, get into a whole new industry, which is super complex. And coming in at the very beginning of a company, you don't have so many mentors. So it was just me and Stephen, who's our CEO, sat across from each other. My first job was to get an office space. So we had no office when I joined, get furniture. So got some furniture, a lot of it for free, actually. We got some really cool, and we got a Zaha Hadid sofa for free from the V&A.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was, smashed that one. And yeah, then it's kind of been a learning curve, a really steep learning curve.
Oh, sorry, you have completely knocked me over. How have you got a Zaha Hadid couch for free?
So yeah, it was one of my first tasks was, furnish the office. Let's get an office and then let's furnish it. So I went on free cycle because our budget was very limited. So I thought I'd look for what we could find for free in the first place. And the V&A had a listing for actually just some IKEA Kallax units, like storage shelves and some bookcases. And I was like, they look pretty good. I'm interested. Do you have anything else we could potentially have? And they sent me an Excel sheet with a list of different furniture items. And on the Excel sheet, not on the free cycle listing, but on the Excel sheet, it said Zaha Hadid sofa. And
so cool.
Yeah, I was like, I think we'll take that. So we collected that, took it to the office. It's like a red leather couch, probably like 4 meters long, takes up half of our office. So not very practical, but it looks.
I mean, I would visit the offices just for the couch, to be fair.
Well, you're welcome to come and see it.
Had we known, we'd ask you to bring the couch here for us.
I'd need probably 4 assistants if I was going to do that.
RheEnergise has grown pretty well so far, so maybe there were some people who could help.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It's very cool. So talk to us about what RheEnergise does. I know you said energy storage. Tell us about what that is, for dummies.
Sure. So energy storage is a technology class which we need to soak up excess renewable energy so we can have power when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. So as we move to decarbonize our power grids, we need to rely on more and more intermittent renewables. So wind and solar power, which are great and they're the lowest cost form of electricity, but they're very intermittent and unpredictable. So we need to have something which can allow us to capture that electricity when we have it and shift it and store it so that we can dispatch it at times when we need it. So when people put the kettle on, if there's no wind, if there's no solar, we can still have clean power going to people's homes.
So just to remind you, we are on camera, so you cannot jump over and kill me. Explain to me why that isn't just battery storage.
So battery storage is what most people think of when they think of energy storage, or at least in the energy industry, because they're incredibly successful as a technology group. And we've seen huge deployment of batteries across the UK and worldwide. We specifically are developing a long duration energy storage technology. So our technology is called high density hydro. It's based on pumped hydro, which has been around for 100 years. And actually pumped hydro, before anyone had heard of batteries, had already been operating for 100 years. So we have some projects in Switzerland and across Europe that have been operational for over 100 years and counting. So it's an extremely mature technology, and it can provide storage, so continuously absorbing power or dispatching power to the grid for periods of 24 hours or even more, providing storage for kind of 6 hours up to 16 hours. And we need that in the UK because there we have periods where we have oversupply of wind for many, many hours at a time. And we have the same deficits, which last for kind of 6 hours up to 16, 24, even days where we have a deficit of renewable electricity. So we need storage which can power the grid in the absence of renewable electricity for those periods of time. And lithium ion is very well suited to energy storage, but specifically short duration applications. So when we look at most lithium ion batteries in the UK, they tend to be kind of 1-2 hours, because that's how they operate really, really well in the market. They're really fast to respond. They're quite cheap to roll out at those durations, and they're really, really good at those kind of applications. But when you start looking at longer storage durations, which is what we really need if we're going to get to 100% renewable electricity, or 90%, 80%, that's where new technologies need to come in. Because if you look at the cost, it's much more cost effective to deploy, say, a pumped hydro or high density hydro, which is our technology, at those kind of durations.
That is such a cool explanation. Thank you for making it so simple, but so clear. I really appreciate that. I'm very curious. I have to confess, I don't know much about energy storage. This is a learning experience for me as much as it might be for someone else. In terms of energy storage in the UK, obviously we have a strategy and we have the industrial strategy and all of the plans that we have, so Clean Power 2030, etc. What is your perspective in terms of how energy storage is perceived versus, energy storage is perceived versus how energy storage is actually, how willing are people to uptake, include it in the strategy? Do you think there's still an education gap that we have to get to before people start taking it up? Or do you think we've passed that like nascent technology period?
I think it's an interesting question. I think it depends who you ask. I mean, I think when I joined RheEnergise 4 years ago, I had not really heard of energy storage, honestly. I knew we needed renewable energy. I knew we needed to decarbonize, but energy storage and that part of the puzzle wasn't something I'd really ever thought about. And I think it's probably the same for most people. You know, it's the invisible part of the puzzle. You see the wind turbines, you see solar. Everyone knows that that's the future of energy, but not many people think about what we do with that electricity or how we store that electricity and make sure we can use it at all times whenever we have demand on the grid. So I think in terms of the general public, awareness is still quite low. But I think in terms of policymakers, things have come a really long way in the past few years. Clean Power 2030 does specifically talk about capacity needs for both short duration and long duration technologies, but it acknowledges that there's a kind of technology gap where we have a lot of emerging technologies in the long duration space, but not many technologies apart from pumped hydro, which are commercially mature and ready to deploy at scale. So we're one company who's developing a new solution. Currently, you know, we've just got to demo scale, so we're still on our journey to commercialize. And there's a lot of other similar technologies as well in the same space. And we're probably a couple of years away still from being able to deploy at scale.
That's really cool. I can imagine someone listening to this podcast and being like, her job sounds really, really cool, from like finding furniture to becoming like bringing a energy storage technology to commercialization. I can only imagine what your day-to-day is like, and it sounds like quite adventurous. I'm just thinking, for someone who is inspired by it, what would that kind of advice be for them?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of what I'm doing at the moment at RheEnergise, which I know wasn't the exact question, but to kind of give context, I work in the commercial team at the moment to build our pipeline and basically move our technology from demonstration scale to commercial readiness. So looking for those early projects that we can build our first of a kind commercial project with commercial partners. So looking for sites, looking for partners, looking for finance for those projects. And my advice from my experience, which is probably different to a lot of people's experiences, is, you know, if you find a company that you find really interesting, just go for it, especially if you're at the beginning of your career. Go in a junior role, go work somewhere where there's loads of room to grow, where you know there's the team's going to grow and you can kind of pick the route that suits you. Because I came in an operations role and I've since moved into the commercial team, and we've kind of, that's what I was going to say, quadrupled, but it's more than that. And I can't remember, think of the word, but we've increased sixfold, sextupled, or whatever you would call that. So there's a lot of growth opportunities, and it's been really cool to kind of grow with the company and develop my role through those years.
That is very cool. And I think just thinking around the skill sets, so like what kind of skill sets that you would need from an energy storage perspective, or someone who is interested in that, what would you think is that skill set? I mean, you don't have to list every single skill set because that's insane.
Yeah, I mean, I think having a technical background is definitely helpful. You know, I think a lot of people graduate from engineering or science degrees and think like, oh, I don't know how I'm ever going to use this unless I go into a lab or, you know, working on kind of project sites in R&D, or we're going to work in consultancy and doing something that's totally different and kind of having an office job. And I think you don't have to directly apply your skills to a vocation for it to be useful. So I think having a technical background is helpful. Being able to take complex subjects and think about them in simple terms is really helpful. And then just kind of going out and talking to people and learning as much as you can. I think, for me, that's been the biggest thing, like going to events, speaking to people, meeting people, and having mentors within your organization as well who can help you grow and make sure you're building your skills, whether it's communication or public speaking or modeling in the way that you need to advance your career.
That is very, very cool. I really like the element around having a technical background and not boxing yourself to say, if I am a science degree, I will eventually end up in a lab or in some remote area where you're in R&D. Like, that's really, really powerful stuff. I would also add just asking the questions, like asking, do you have anything else? And then getting the Excel spreadsheet, because you never know what you might find. So I think that's really cool. From an energy storage perspective and in the broader UK, European, global sense, very keen to get your perspective in terms of, given there's that public knowledge gap, and I would say that almost is a missed opportunity for people who do have those skill sets, who do come from a technical background, to apply to areas like that. What would you say are the things we need to do more of, or we need to start doing?
I think, making the energy sector more interesting to outsiders. I think once you work in energy, you know how interesting it is and how complicated it is, and how much there is to do and the ambitions that there are outside of the sector. That's not something which people know about. Most people at university or at school or looking for a new job wouldn't probably consider a career in energy, because you don't know how interesting it can be. So I think that education piece of, going to universities, giving talks, showing that jobs can be varied, that, you're really on the kind of front line, and how essential it is if we're going to decarbonize our power system. So having people who are able to kind of share that and share the excitement of it, and not just talking about kind of, super technical projects all the time, because that can be quite off-putting, I think, as someone who doesn't really understand it. Like, even listening to industry podcasts, a lot of the time they're so complicated. And if you're not in the industry already, you probably won't understand what's going on. So I think that kind of accessible education piece is really important.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, that's what we're trying to do with this podcast. So fingers crossed that helps. Making the energy sector more attractive. I know you're passionate about that intersection of younger people and then getting them into leadership roles. I'm very keen to get your perspective in terms of what we need to do from a UK perspective to make it more attractive, firstly to younger people, and even just to a diverse set of stakeholders.
I mean, I think just stuff like putting it in the curriculum, having visits to, go and see a wind farm, go and visit a pumped hydro project, because we have 2 in the UK that you can visit. I think one of them's closed at the moment. I actually haven't been, which is quite embarrassing, but I would love to go. There's one in North Wales and there's one in Scotland, and they're both, mega projects. They're hundreds of megawatts, which to non-energy people is very big. Yeah, you can go underground. They have these huge caverns. I think the underground of the Dinorwig project in Wales is the size of St. Paul's Cathedral, just the underground cavern. Yeah. And that's where the turbines are, and that's where the kind of all the power equipment sits. But just, it's super impressive. It's kind of a real feat of engineering. So going and seeing stuff like that, I think, could make a huge difference to getting people onto the skills path that they need. And I think, we're seeing a lot of interest now from young people who have graduated from specific masters, energy systems engineering or energy policy at really good universities, who are specifically wanting to work in that space. So it's definitely kind of happening, but I think, there's a lot of people wanting to go into it, but there's more and more jobs being created. So there's still a deficit, it feels, of good people who want to work in the industry. Yeah. So yeah, I think kind of keeping up with the pace of change.
I think that's a fair point in terms of the fact that there's so much growth in the energy sector that we don't have the number of people, and young people probably, we need more. So there is interest, but it definitely needs to ramp up. I think in terms of that perspective, from a leadership perspective, I know when I first started in my career, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's the McKinsey ad on like social media where there's a guy trying to say a point in the boardroom and is waiting for like the perfect opportunity, and the conversation just keeps going. I've had multiple of those in the start of my career. I think I still sometimes have it. Thankfully, Teams has the raise hand function, so you can like be like, I have something to say. But like that, like when you start your career, you're so uncertain of sharing an opinion. So what would your advice be or some learnings that you've had across your career in terms of being able to speak to the CEO and be like, actually, this couch, even though it's impractical and super huge and doesn't fit space, is an asset and we should keep it?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think my experience is probably quite different because of the stage at which I joined RheEnergise, so right at the beginning. And because, we're a small company and we've grown really quickly. But I think, most of the time people are really willing to have conversations. People aren't going to think you're silly or ignore you. There's a lot of really good women's networking spaces as well now in energy, which can feel a lot more welcoming for, especially young women in the sector. You go and it's a lot easier to kind of join a conversation. I think it can be less intimidating. So that's also a really good forum for people who maybe don't feel like they have space in their workplace to kind of speak to someone or get time one-on-one with people. I think it's Rewire that run one of the networks, so that they do really good events. And there's a few different, I can't remember all the names, but there's a few networks going now. There's a specific energy storage network, and so they're really good spaces as well to kind of find mentors and people who can share their experiences.
Yeah, I think that's definitely it. I know there's also the young energy professionals, which I'm a big advocate for, and just finding your people, because it's exactly like you said earlier, once you're in energy, you're just like, oh my God, I love it here. It's so difficult, but for some reason I love it here. And there's everyone else is as passionate about it. So it's finding your people in that specific circumstance. It really is just like a learning process for me. So there is a moment where I'm like, oh my God, so new information, so cool. But then I need time to simmer and accept all of that information. From the perspective of understanding you as a person. I know earlier we were having a conversation about the fact that you cycle and you swim, and you were talking about you've done marathons or ultra marathons.
I've done a couple of triathlons. I'm doing London Marathon next year, actually. Got a place in the ballot. Yep. I'm nervous about that.
Is it your first marathon?
I did one a few years ago, but it was in COVID times, so the actual race was cancelled. So we just ran around London, which was
fun,
interesting. Yeah. And then at the end, I think I'd gone the wrong way, so I was just doing loops around Hyde Park.
Okay.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
Which was, it was pretty draining. I was kind of losing the will at the end. I was like, shall I just stop?
Did you finish?
I finished, yeah.
Oh, that's crazy. I would have 100% stopped. Did you not try and take a different route, maybe?
So I went over the wrong bridge. So we went all the way up to Chiswick, and then back down the Thames path up to, I think I was supposed to go up to Tower Bridge, but then I must have crossed one of the earlier bridges, maybe London Bridge or something, and ran back towards Hyde Park. And then when I got to Hyde Park, I'd still had like another 5 kilometers to go or something.
So, okay. It was only 5. I thought it was like an insane amount of like 20 or something. And for 20 Ks, you were just running around Hyde Park.
No, it was the very last bit, but it was interesting. I'm not sure I'd recommend that to anyone.
Yeah, doesn't sound like, but it's probably a really good analogy for what it's like working in the industry. At least from my perspective, everything is such a big problem to solve, and it's never been done before. So there is lots of trial and error. It'd be very cool to get your perspective, having worked in RheEnergise, coming from a completely different background, what it is about the sector that excites you or what you enjoy about your job.
I just really like the fact that my job's super diverse. Like every day is different, which I think is partly representative of working for a small company, but also it's working in innovation. So, we're an energy storage solution provider, but we're also an innovation company, and that's really exciting. So we're really trying to do something new and bringing together lots of different disciplines like engineering and chemistry, and lots of different kinds of engineering within that. So civil, mechanical. We have a lot of aeronautical engineers actually, randomly, but it's turbines and fluids. So it makes sense. And that's quite exciting. A lot of things we're doing is the first time anybody's done that or that we're aware of. So it's pushing boundaries, which I really like, because you have to really think. There's no kind of rule book or playbook for how to do it. And that's really interesting.
Yeah. If you haven't already figured out by now, I think you're really, really cool. Like, so cool. I might be fangirling for, but I do think you're a trailblazer for younger people. Where would you like to see the sector in the future?
I'd love to see more women in the sector. I think energy is doing better. Energy storage is okay, but when you look at hydropower, which is, we can kind of sit in lots of different industries depending on how you cut it. But one industry which we are part of is hydropower. So we're part of the British Hydro Association, and, we go to some hydro events. And when you walk into a room, it's often full of men, and not just men, but like the average age is much older, because we've not actually built any pumped storage projects, which are the really big pumped hydro projects in the UK, for over 40 years. So that skills base is much, much older. And now we have a huge volume of pumped storage projects. We're developing a new form of pumped storage. So there's a big skills gap in terms of the hydro sector in the energy sector. It'd be really cool to see more young people coming into hydropower, and not just your battery storage or solar, wind, the technologies that everybody knows about, but actually, I guess, revitalizing older technologies and developing the skills base to build those out.
Yeah, I think it's really cool though, the fact that there is new technologies, but it's based on like previous knowledge or existing knowledge. That just increases the success factor so much more, I would think, which is really, really cool. So thank you for teaching me that. One of my questions that I love to ask is, if you had to, zero restraints, so no money, no policy, no government issues, no tech issues, so tech is all free and has existed in commercialized state already. If you were zero restraints to change the energy industry in the UK, what would be the 3 changes you would make?
Interesting. I mean, I would love the energy industry to exist in a political vacuum where there's no influence of people like, Donald Trump or Nigel Farage saying that net zero is bullshit and that we don't need to do it. That would be really nice, and to just have sensible policy changes coming through so that we're kind of going in one direction instead of zigzagging around all the time. So that would be nice. And then we'd probably be a lot further along than we are now in terms of decarbonizing. I think I would really like to see more women in the sector, particularly in the kind of subsectors like hydro, where there really aren't very many women at the moment. And I think I'd just love the industry to get on with it, like build the new grid infrastructure, grant planning permission more quickly for new renewables projects, less kind of NIMBYism, and, that's stopping projects moving forward. So yeah, I think that would be really nice.
What is NIMBYism?
So, like a NIMBY, like not in my backyard. So if like a solar farm or a wind farm, they're like, I don't want to see that monstrosity from my garden. So less of them, please. Or at least less weight to their opinions. Like, I'm sorry, the wind farm's getting built.
Yeah. So I think that's an interesting conversation. I've had lots of, we've had previous conversations on the podcast about this. I think it's an interesting comment around that, not in my backyard, and people around it, and how much weight it holds. The thing for me that always sticks out is how 5% of the community have 95% of the noise. I do empathize with it though, because I'm annoyingly that person. So for me, it's okay, but why are they like that? What is driving it? And I wonder if that's potentially a lack of information. So a lack of, we don't really know why we need renewables or why we need XYZ. And then you have your politicians playing that role and almost taking advantage of that vulnerability and being oh, this is why you shouldn't. Yeah, this is probably a very difficult question because I don't know the answer to it, but there's probably something that needs to be done in terms of that communication / taking everyone on the journey with us, to the point that it stops being a blocker, at least, because there's one, taking everyone on the journey so that everyone's happy and we all skipping along to net zero. But it's also, before we even get there, we just need to stop being a blocker, because I agree, permit, consenting, everything around planning takes really, really long. So it takes 7 years to put up infrastructure when it should be taking much, much quicker. And a big portion of that is planning and consenting. What do you think are the things that we need to be changing? And it doesn't have to be, it can be within that non-constrained question, because I appreciate there's no if we do this, that's going to fix it, and magic, boom, we're done.
Yeah, I mean, it is a hard one, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you can empathize with people who, you might have had a beautiful view and then you've had a whole field of solar panels put up. But on the other hand, it's not as ugly as, the climate collapsing and all of our ecosystem not being able to stand up anymore. I think it's a wider perspective thing. So yeah, like you say, if you can educate people about what the alternatives are, which are not great, if we look at the facts, if we don't decarbonize, we're not going to stay within the 1.5 degrees set by the kind of Paris Agreement and the climate change committee. And we are going to see international ecosystem collapse and weather patterns shifting, which is not a nice or desirable outcome. So I think, when you compare to what could happen, suddenly maybe a wind farm doesn't seem so bad. That's quite doom and gloom. Yeah, I think, at a point you have to just get on with stuff. And yeah, it's community engagement is really, really important with renewables, and there has to be some benefit to the community. You can't just build a renewable project and expect people to be happy about it. There has to be some community benefit, money funneling to the community. Provided that's done right, I don't see why these projects shouldn't be able to go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's that I'm a firm believer that you can't talk energy without talking politics, especially if politicians are using energy as a crutch. One of my experiences was having a question related to the whole politics and energy, and their view was slightly, controversial. So their view was that from a Trump perspective, it's his country, their president and their country. Therefore, countries should have autonomy to do whatever they want because that's what's right for them. So it's that local versus international, who sets the tone, who sets the pace, versus how do we do what's right for specific countries? Like, what should we be doing to counter the Trumps, to counter the Nigel Farages, if anything at all?
Gosh, I don't know. It's difficult. It's a really weird political environment at the moment. There's a lot of proponents of free speech, which effectively means saying whatever you want without any repercussions, even if it's inciting violence or hatred. And I think that's really, really dangerous. And I think because we all live in the digital world now, it's much, much harder to control who's seeing the opinions. And, one person can reach so many people online, which is terrifying. So, making sure that we also use our voice for positive things online and not being silenced by people on the far right or people who are climate naysayers, because there are a lot of them at the moment, the net zero naysayers, and just kind of speaking up and challenging those views and making sure that if we do see stuff on social media, which is complete misinformation, that resharing and pointing out why it's wrong, I think does a lot for educating people and making sure that the two perspectives are available.
Yeah. It's also that, like, having the confidence to say the right thing. I think that quote that comes to mind is like, speak the truth even if you're alone in speaking the truth, or something to that effect.
Yeah, and I still, I really don't do that very much. I should 100% be better at that and saying, oh, this isn't right, and here's the evidence and here's the science behind it. Because we always see things, you'll see something pop up on LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever social media app, and it's like, I'm not sure that's 100% right, but it's often easier to just leave it and not say anything.
I do try with my family, but I think there's also a level, and that's probably what makes it so complex, right? And what makes energy transition this time around so complex. Like 60 years ago, we didn't have so many people's opinions and people having access to so much information so quickly. And so there wasn't this nuance of managing people's understanding, managing why reducing climate change is necessary, why we need to decarbonize. But it's also like, you also have to be empathetic and remember that, like, not everyone has the capacity to deal with or be an advocate for climate change. So I think it's confidence, it's empathy. Then there's also some level of like being smart about it. I think probably worth reflecting for my own advocacy levels and how much I advocate. I probably do it in a professional and within my family space, but above and beyond that, I don't know if I can say. Yeah,
I'm thinking how, like, practice what you preach.
But yeah,
we'll think about it.
Yeah, we'll think about it. Maybe we'll start a little advocacy agency, who knows? But yeah, definitely something for us to think about, but also a very interesting point and just highlighting that challenges and the nuance with getting information across.
I mean, I've seen a lot of stuff on, just to put an example to it, like on LinkedIn recently, the US Energy Secretary posting about how if we were to cover the world in solar panels, it would only provide 20% of our energy needs. And people kind of debunking that on LinkedIn and saying, well, actually, we would only need to cover, I think it's 2% or 5% or that kind of order of magnitude of the world with solar panels to provide 100% of our energy needs is totally incorrect, factual, just complete misinformation. And seeing people post about it on LinkedIn, I was like, okay, that's interesting. I mean, I know it's not true, but seeing the two stats side by side is quite kind of powerful, because it makes you then question things that you read and think like, okay, well, the Donald Trumps and the Nigel Farages, like you have to be really careful about just believing the narrative that they peddle, because most of the time it's completely baseless.
Yeah, I completely agree. I wanted to bring a spotlight to one of our podcast listeners, Lori, who's also from the US and has shared similar sentiments on the podcast. We do Chatty Wednesdays. Every Wednesday, we have a little conversation and allow followers and listeners to engage in it. And Lori spoke about how the US is exactly that zigzag energy practice. Lori shared that her perspective is that the the UK will probably be a front runner in terms of the energy transition and will lead in terms of the energy transition in future. Shout out to Lori for sharing and participating in our conversation. Thank you for that. With that, final question. So thank you for your time. It's been super, super incredible, really informative, and definitely stuff for me to reflect on. If you were given advice to a younger version of Lizzi starting her career, what would that advice be?
Gosh, I would say, just don't be afraid to just put yourself out there. And, it's not embarrassing or anything to be ashamed of to cater for yourself and put yourself in situations where you can grow and learn, and not to be afraid to take the opportunity or, apply for the job or do whatever to platform yourself, because even if it doesn't go well, you'll learn from it and it's a step forwards in the right direction. So I think just being less worried or scared about anything to do with taking a step forward in your career.
That's really awesome. Thank you very much for that. It's been great having you, and fingers crossed we have you in the future sharing energy storage and the technology gets commercialized.
Thanks very much. It's been really nice to be here.
That was brilliant, wasn't it? Told you Lizzi is absolutely incredible. And it was such a joy to interview her. For me, the biggest takeaway was the difference between battery storage and energy storage. I know when Lizzi and I first started speaking, I kept referring to it as battery storage rather than energy storage. And after today's conversation, it just helped me so much to understand that actually it's energy storage and there's a massive difference. My additional reflection on this podcast, it was one of the first times we brought our community into the podcast, which is really exciting for me. So shout out again to Lori from the US for participating in the conversation. It's always really exciting for us as a startup podcast to have people recognize and be part of the conversations. We do Chatty Wednesdays every Wednesday. So follow us on our LinkedIn and Instagram pages. Predominantly LinkedIn, if I'm being honest, and we're kind of shit at, but we get in there and we'll be better. For our next guest, we chat into Josh Robertson, who is a deeply empathetic and incredible entrepreneur in the energy industry. I think it's going to be one that you absolutely do not want to miss. So stay tuned. Bye.